What if Caesarion, son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, became Rome's true heir? Would the Roman Empire have been shaped by his reign, or would it have been thrust into chaos? Imagine a world where Egypt and Rome stood united under one ruler. Could this have changed history forever? Let's explore the possibilities. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment below to help What If History grow. Let's get into it. Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE left a massive power vacuum in Rome. The Senate, fearing his growing power, saw his death as a chance to regain control, but they underestimated the forces at play. His adopted son, Octavian, would rise to fill that void, eventually becoming Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. But what if Caesar's biological son, Caesarion, had been declared Caesar's true heir? Born to Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, Caesarion was seen by his mother as the rightful successor to Caesar's legacy. Yet, history tells us he never got that opportunity. With Cleopatra's influence in Egypt and Caesarion's connection to Rome, he could have been a powerful figure, one who might have shaped both Roman and Egyptian futures in ways we can only imagine. Would Rome have embraced him as its leader, or would his rule have led to even more chaos? Caesarion's claim to the throne was clear, but it was also dangerously complicated. In Rome, power was never handed over. It was seized, often through manipulation, betrayal, and violence. If Caesarion had been named heir, he would have had to navigate a ruthless and cutthroat political landscape. Octavian, already consolidating power, would not simply step aside. He was calculating, ambitious, and determined to claim Rome for himself. Meanwhile, the Senate, already wary of any ruler with too much power, would have been reluctant to back Caesarion, seeing him as a foreign-born heir with ties to Egypt, not Rome's traditions. The powerful generals and political factions of the time, from the war-hardened Mark Antony to the cunning Cicero, would each have seen Caesarion's rule as an opportunity to further their own ambitions. The stage was set for a power struggle that could have torn the empire apart. Would Caesarion have been able to overcome these obstacles, or would his bloodline prove to be his greatest curse? What if Caesar had named Caesarion as his heir, instead of Octavian, his grandnephew? Imagine a world where Caesarion, rather than Octavian, seized control of Rome. With Cleopatra's unparalleled influence over Egypt and the vast wealth of her kingdom, Caesarion could have built a formidable power base, challenging the Senate's control and perhaps even bypassing the traditional republican structures. His rule wouldn't have been easy, but with his mother's diplomatic skills and Egypt's military might behind him, he might have had the support to take on Rome's elite. The Senate, already fractured, would have had to contend with a ruler not only of Roman blood, but one with direct ties to Egypt, a foreign power that had long been a thorn in Rome's side. Caesarion's ascent would have shifted the balance of power dramatically. Rome, a city already on the brink of transformation, would have had to reconsider its policies toward Egypt. Would Caesarion have strengthened Rome's relationship with Egypt, merging two great civilizations? Or would his rule have led to the expansion of Egyptian influence in the Mediterranean, causing further tension with Rome's traditional allies? Imagine the Roman legions, commanded by a ruler with Egypt's wealth and Egypt's knowledge of warfare, pushing further into the east, potentially even changing the course of Roman expansion. The political landscape would be unrecognizable, and the future of the empire, once solely under the thumb of Roman aristocracy, could have been forever altered. The first challenge Caesarion would face: Octavian himself. Known for his cunning and strategic brilliance, Octavian would never have accepted Caesarion as his superior without a fight. The rivalry between them would have been even more intense than the one we saw between Octavian and Mark Antony. Octavian, already a master at playing the political game, had the Senate's ear and the loyalty of many of Rome's most powerful figures. He would never allow Caesarion's legitimacy to go unchallenged, especially with his own claim to power as Caesar's adopted heir. Caesarion, despite his royal lineage, would have struggled to win the Senate's favor. They saw him as a foreigner, the son of a queen, not fully Roman. And with Cleopatra's influence looming over him, his rule would always be suspect. Octavian, on the other hand, was seen as the natural successor to Caesar's legacy. He was strategic, calculating, and knew how to manipulate the Senate to his advantage. He would have portrayed Caesarion as a threat to the stability of Rome, positioning himself as the protector of the Republic, even though he too had ambitions of becoming the empire's sole ruler. As Caesarion attempted to solidify his position, Mark Antony, once Caesar's ally, would be caught in the middle. His own rivalry with Octavian would complicate matters. Antony's allegiance was crucial, and he could either be an ally to Caesarion or a threat. Would he side with Caesarion, recognizing their shared ties to Caesar, or would he seize this opportunity to strike out on his own, looking to undermine both Caesarion and Octavian for his own benefit? The struggle for control of Rome would intensify, and alliances would shift like sand, with every faction trying to outmaneuver the others. Caesarion would need to navigate this treacherous terrain, but the question remains, could he outplay Octavian, or would his reign be doomed from the start? Cleopatra, a queen who had already outmaneuvered many of Rome's most powerful men, would undoubtedly have played a crucial role in Caesarion's rise to power. Her ability to navigate the treacherous political waters of both Egypt and Rome made her one of the most skilled rulers of her time. But how far could her influence extend in the political heart of Rome? While her intelligence and strategic mind were unmatched, she was also seen as a foreign queen, an outsider in Rome's political world. Would Cleopatra have been a powerful ally for Caesarion, guiding him through the complex power structures of Rome? Or would her presence become a liability, with Roman elites unwilling to accept the influence of a foreign monarch over their city? It's likely that Cleopatra's political savvy would have been both a boon and a burden for her son. On one hand, her connections, her wealth, and her status as Egypt's ruler could have provided Caesarion with the resources he needed to challenge Octavian and the Senate. She had already proven herself capable of bending even the most powerful Roman men to her will, including Julius Caesar himself. Her influence in Rome, though not as strong as in Egypt, would have given Caesarion an edge in navigating the complex Roman political landscape. But on the other hand, Cleopatra's close involvement in Caesarion's rise might have painted him as a puppet of Egypt. Rome's traditional elites, many of whom distrusted Egypt's power and ambition, might have seen Caesarion's rule as a threat to Rome's sovereignty. Could Cleopatra's ambitions for Egypt have aligned with the needs of her son, or would her desire to see Egypt secure its power ultimately clash with Caesarion's desire to control Rome? This tension would define much of Caesarion's potential rule and his struggle for legitimacy. The Senate, always wary of absolute power, would have had a different response to Caesarion than they did to Octavian. Octavian, though ambitious, was Roman by blood and had the backing of his adopted father's legacy. But Caesarion, as the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, was seen as a foreigner, an outsider with deep ties to Egypt, a powerful and often distrusted kingdom. Would the Senate have resisted Caesarion's rule as they had Caesar's, viewing him as another tyrant threatening the Republic? Or would they have reluctantly accepted his legitimacy, knowing that the power of Egypt was behind him? Figures like Cicero, staunch defenders of Roman tradition, would have viewed Caesarion as a potential threat to the Republic's ideals. The Senate, already struggling with the increasing power of individual rulers, would not easily accept Caesarion's rise, especially with Cleopatra's influence looming over him. For them, any king, especially one with foreign blood, was a step away from the Republic's foundations. They might have seen Caesarion as an even greater danger than Octavian, given the external power Egypt represented. If they viewed him as a puppet of his mother, Cleopatra, they would have opposed him with everything they had, attempting to undermine his rule from the very beginning. However, some senators might have seen Caesarion differently. Given his royal lineage and his mother's power, he could have been a unifying figure, someone capable of strengthening Rome's position in the East, securing its influence over Egypt and beyond. Would they have seen him as a potential savior, someone who could lead Rome into a new era of glory? Or would his foreign ties always be a bridge too far? The Senate's response would have been complex, as they weighed Caesarion's legitimacy against the looming shadow of Egypt's power, torn between seeing him as a potential ally or a dangerous rival to their control. The Roman legions were fiercely loyal, but would they have followed Caesarion? After all, Caesar had commanded them in Gaul, leading his legions to countless victories and earning their unwavering respect. Caesarion, as his son, would certainly have inherited some of that legacy. But loyalty to Caesar was not simply about blood. It was about respect, shared experience, and the bond forged in battle. Would the legions view Caesarion as a worthy leader, or would they see him as an untested figure, too young and too tied to the foreign influence of Egypt? On the other side of the coin stood Octavian. As the adopted son of Julius Caesar, Octavian could claim the legacy of his father, but his path to power had been anything but smooth. Still, he had the advantage of experience, military victories, and a growing base of support within the Senate and among Rome's elite. He had already proved himself as a military strategist, but more importantly, he was seen by many as the man who would restore Rome to its former glory, reclaiming the Republic's strength after Caesar's death. The legions, who had already fought under his banner, would be more inclined to follow him, especially after the battles he fought in the civil wars. Caesarion, however, would not be without his strengths. If he could gain the loyalty of even a few legions, backed by Cleopatra's riches and Egypt's resources, he might have been able to build a powerful force to rival Octavian's. The legions were not just warriors, they were symbols of Roman power, and whoever controlled them controlled Rome. Caesarion's military command, though possibly untested, would need to convince the legions that he was capable of leading them to victory, that he could continue his father's legacy. Would the legions fall in line? Or would the competition for their allegiance turn Rome's military into yet another battleground? This question would determine the fate of Caesarion's reign and the future of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra was not just a ruler of Egypt. She had a vision for the future of the Mediterranean. She wasn't content with merely maintaining Egypt's ancient glory. She sought to elevate it as a dominant power in the region. If she had managed to secure Caesarion's reign, that vision could have dramatically shifted Rome's foreign policy. Rome, historically wary of Egyptian influence, might have found itself in a new era of cooperation, or even dependency on Egypt. Cleopatra's desire for a united Mediterranean world, with Egypt and Rome at its center, would have shaped Caesarion's leadership and Rome's dealings with the wider world. If Caesarion had risen to power, Cleopatra's influence would have likely steered Rome toward closer ties with Egypt, forging an alliance that could have been as formidable as it was controversial. Egypt's wealth, resources, and strategic location could have opened new economic and military opportunities for Rome. With access to Egypt's grain wealth and military strength, Caesarion could have expanded Rome's influence in the east, securing trade routes and resources critical for the empire's survival. Would Cleopatra have encouraged Rome to pivot toward the east, prioritizing trade and alliances with Parthia and other eastern kingdoms over the traditional push to the north and west? Such a shift in foreign policy would have undoubtedly changed the way Rome interacted with other powers. Instead of focusing solely on expansion through conquest, Rome might have pursued diplomatic alliances, cementing its power through strategic marriages and treaties. The Germanic tribes, always a threat to Rome's borders, might have been handled with more diplomatic finesse, with Egypt's wealth allowing Rome to negotiate better terms or secure defensive alliances. Even the distant Britannia, still on the fringes of Rome's attention, could have become an area of interest, perhaps with Cleopatra's vision leading to early attempts to bring it under Roman control, not through military force, but through political influence. Caesarion, under Cleopatra's guidance, could have led Rome down a path of more strategic alliances, focusing on trade and diplomacy rather than relentless conquest. Would this have created a more stable, prosperous Rome? Or would the empire's military might have faltered without the constant expansion that had defined its power? The balance between Rome's traditional military aggression and Cleopatra's diplomatic savvy would have shaped the empire's future for generations. Caesarion's rule would likely have led to a profound shift in Rome's social structure. Under his leadership, influenced by both his Roman heritage and Cleopatra's Egyptian vision, Rome could have experienced the birth of a new hybrid culture. A culture where Roman discipline and military might blended with Egyptian sophistication and religious tradition. Would Rome have embraced this fusion, or would it have led to a cultural rift? One of the most striking changes could have been in the realm of religion and social practices. Egypt's polytheistic beliefs and practices were deeply entrenched in daily life, with gods and goddesses like Isis and Osiris playing a central role. Would Caesarion have allowed or even encouraged the worship of Egyptian gods alongside Roman deities? Imagine Roman citizens making pilgrimages to Egypt's temples, participating in Egyptian rituals, and perhaps even seeing their gods interwoven with those of the Roman pantheon. This blending of traditions could have expanded Rome's spiritual horizons, but it would also have created tension with those who clung to the old Roman religious practices. Visually, the streets of Rome might have become a strange blend of cultures. Roman citizens, once staunchly devoted to their traditions, might have started to embrace Egyptian customs, with temples to Isis rising alongside the traditional Roman gods. Roman clothing could have incorporated Egyptian styles, with linen garments and ornate jewelry becoming more common among the elite. In public squares, Roman citizens could have found themselves discussing philosophy not only in Latin but in the language of the Nile as well, as Egyptian intellectualism and Roman pragmatism merged into a new, more cosmopolitan way of thinking. The social implications of Caesarion's reign would have extended beyond religion and culture. The class system in Rome might have been reshaped, as Egypt's more fluid social hierarchy, one where power was sometimes dictated by royal bloodlines rather than pure military might, could have influenced Roman society. Would Cleopatra's vision of a more inclusive society have led to a greater sense of social mobility in Rome? Or would the entrenched Roman elite resist, trying to preserve their status while pushing back against the influence of Egypt? Caesarion's reign might have sparked a cultural renaissance in Rome, blending the best of both worlds, but it also could have created deep divides within Roman society between the old guard and the new vision for the empire. Would Roman citizens have embraced this transformation, or would it have led to rebellion and perhaps even civil war over the changing cultural and religious landscape? Caesarion, while a powerful heir, could have met his end just as his father did, by betrayal. The very same political currents that led to Julius Caesar's assassination would have been at work against Caesarion. Power in Rome was never handed over without bloodshed, and Caesarion's rule, however promising, would have made him a target for those who feared his growing influence. Would the Senate, forever wary of monarchy, have plotted against him? Or would it have been his own generals, those who resented his foreign ties and his perceived weakness, who turned on him? The fact that Caesarion was seen as both a Roman and an Egyptian heir would have made him a contentious figure. His military command, though backed by his mother's riches, was not as established as Octavian's. There were bound to be factions within his own ranks, legions loyal to the idea of Roman purity, not a ruler with Egyptian blood. Would these generals, perhaps jealous of his rise or fearing their own loss of power, have conspired to overthrow him? The tension between Roman loyalty and Egypt's influence would have created an unstable foundation, one prone to revolt. But the greatest threat to Caesarion's reign would have come from Octavian. His ambition knew no bounds, and his ability to manipulate political and military alliances was second to none. If Caesarion had been seen as a weak or ineffective ruler, Octavian would have capitalized on it, turning the Senate and the people against him. With the Senate backing Octavian as the true heir of Rome, any military failure or political misstep by Caesarion could have been the excuse needed to declare him unfit to rule. In the wake of Caesarion's potential death, Octavian's rise would have been swift and brutal. His faction would have moved quickly to consolidate power, perhaps even before Caesarion's body was cold. The military, sensing the shifting tides, would have flocked to Octavian's banner, giving him the support he needed to crush any opposition. The question is, who would have delivered the fatal blow to Caesarion? Was it an insider, perhaps one of his own generals or senators, who saw an opportunity to align with the rising power of Octavian? Or would it have been the people, sick of Egypt's growing influence, who turned on Caesarion and called for his removal? The betrayal would have been swift, but its consequences would be long-lasting. Once Caesarion fell, the door would be wide open for Octavian to step into his place, ensuring that the legacy of Julius Caesar would pass into his hands, not his son's. A Caesarion-led Rome could have been a different beast entirely. Under his rule, Rome might have found itself at a crossroads, torn between its deep-rooted Roman traditions and the exotic allure of Egypt's power and wisdom. Would Caesarion have expanded Rome's borders as his father did, leading the legions further into the unknown territories? Or would he have turned inward, focusing on strengthening the heart of the empire, integrating Egypt's resources and knowledge into Rome's infrastructure? It's easy to imagine Caesarion as a reformer, one who, influenced by his mother Cleopatra's vision of a united Mediterranean, could have crafted a new type of Roman Empire. His leadership would have been deeply shaped by the merging of Roman and Egyptian ideologies. While Rome's military might and imperial ambition would remain, Caesarion might have embraced Egypt's sophisticated approach to governance, fostering a more inclusive, perhaps more bureaucratic system. Would he have consolidated power by reforming Rome's political structure, creating a more centralized and efficient government? Or would his reign have marked the beginning of an era of imperial excess, where the line between ruler and god blurred in a way it never had before? Imagine the physical transformation of Rome under Caesarion's rule. The architectural landscape could have been a fusion of Roman practicality and Egyptian grandeur. Temples to Egyptian gods might have been built alongside Roman forums, with statues of Isis and Osiris standing tall in the heart of the city. The construction of monumental structures, combining the Roman arches with Egyptian obelisks and hieroglyphs, could have given Rome a striking new look, a reflection of Caesarion's mixed heritage. The blending of Roman and Egyptian styles would not only have reshaped the city's skyline, but would have symbolized a merging of two cultures into a singular, powerful identity. In the military realm, Caesarion might have altered the structure of Rome's legions. While Rome's armies had long been the backbone of its expansion, Caesarion could have incorporated Egyptian military strategies, perhaps favoring specialized units with Egyptian-style chariotry or naval power. His ties to Egypt could have bolstered Rome's maritime strength, opening up new opportunities for trade and conquest along the Mediterranean coast and beyond. Socially, the empire could have shifted to reflect this fusion of cultures. The traditional Roman class system, with its rigid divide between the plebeians and patricians, might have been softened by the more inclusive, though still hierarchical, structure of Egyptian society. It's possible that Caesarion's rule could have led to a more cosmopolitan Rome, where the boundaries between Roman citizens and conquered peoples began to blur. Would Egypt's tolerance for different religions and practices have inspired Rome to be more accepting of diverse cultures within its borders? Perhaps the empire would have become a melting pot of Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Eastern traditions, laying the foundation for a truly global empire. The question remains, would Caesarion's Rome have been a place of innovation and cultural renaissance, or would his reign have been bogged down by the weight of his dual legacy, one that connected the might of Rome with the mystique of Egypt? Would Rome have thrived under a ruler who embraced both, or would the tensions between the two worlds have torn it apart? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. Rome under Caesarion would have been a radically different empire, one built on a foundation of both power and mysticism, strength and culture, a fusion of two worlds that would have left an indelible mark on history. Rome's relationship with the Parthian Empire, Gaul, and even Africa could have shifted drastically under Caesarion's rule. As the son of both Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, Caesarion's rise to power would have changed the way Rome engaged with its neighbors. Would he have been a stabilizing force in the Mediterranean, using diplomacy and trade to strengthen Rome's position? Or would his ambition, fueled by Egypt's resources and his mother's strategic genius, have led Rome into more wars of conquest, aiming to expand its borders even further? Let's start with the Parthian Empire. For decades, Rome and Parthia had been rivals, with frequent border skirmishes and power struggles in the east. Under Caesarion, the dynamics could have shifted from endless conflict to strategic alliance. Egypt's wealth and knowledge of the East might have given Rome the leverage it needed to negotiate with Parthia, securing peace and economic growth. But the question remains, would Parthia, with its fierce independence, have been willing to share power with a Roman emperor backed by Egypt? Or would this tentative peace have been shattered by the Parthians' fear of Rome's growing influence? Moving to Gaul, Caesarion might have continued his father's work of expanding Roman influence, but with a different approach. Under Julius Caesar, Rome had absorbed Gaul into its empire, but Caesarion could have taken a more diplomatic route, focusing on consolidating Roman power through cultural integration rather than military dominance. Would he have sought alliances with the Gallic tribes, encouraging them to adopt Roman customs and law, or would his reign have witnessed more bloodshed as he sought to fully integrate Gaul into the Roman Empire? The future of Gaul might have depended on whether Caesarion chose peace over conquest, a path that could have stabilized the region or sparked ongoing rebellion. In Africa, particularly in regions like Carthage and Egypt's southern neighbors, Caesarion's rule would have had significant implications. With Cleopatra's experience in managing Egypt's relations with Africa, Caesarion could have strengthened Rome's presence across the continent, forging alliances with African kingdoms and expanding trade routes. However, this might have also led to conflicts, particularly with the Berber tribes and other local powers who resisted Roman expansion. Would Caesarion's diplomatic finesse have been enough to avoid conflict, or would Rome's insatiable hunger for control have led to more conquests in the African interior? The global implications of Caesarion's reign would have been profound. On one hand, his leadership could have ushered in an era of unprecedented stability in the Mediterranean, with Rome using its wealth and alliances to maintain peace and control. On the other hand, Caesarion's ambitions, bolstered by Egypt's military and economic power, could have led to new wars of conquest, with Rome clashing against old rivals and seeking new territories to dominate. The real question is, could the Roman Empire have thrived under such a strategy, or would the strain of constant expansion have eventually caused it to crumble from within? The potential for both growth and collapse was there, depending on the path Caesarion chose. What if Caesarion had secured a lasting dynasty? The implications for Rome's future would have been enormous. With his unique position as the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, Caesarion had the potential to reshape Rome's imperial structure forever. If he had established a dynasty, would Rome have evolved into a true monarchy, with successive generations of Caesarion's bloodline at the helm? Or would the Senate, always wary of concentrated power, have continued to undermine the very idea of dynastic rule? If Caesarion's reign had endured, the very concept of what it meant to be Roman could have changed. The Roman Empire, which had prided itself on its republican roots, might have been slowly transformed into a more traditional monarchy, much like Egypt. His heirs, born of both Roman and Egyptian lineage, would have represented a fusion of two worlds, one deeply rooted in Roman military and political traditions, the other in Egyptian culture, diplomacy, and religious practices. This blending could have either strengthened the empire or fractured it further, as it would have raised questions about Rome's identity and the future of its governance. The Senate's response to Caesarion's heirs would likely have been cautious, if not outright hostile. Senators, who had long held power and influence, would have viewed Caesarion's bloodline as a potential challenge to their own authority. Would they have accepted a dynastic rule, or would they have attempted to limit the power of Caesarion's descendants at every turn? Even if Caesarion's dynasty had remained in power, the Senate might have continued to play a shadow role in the empire, pulling the strings behind the scenes, using manipulation and politics to undermine the emperor's direct control. Future emperors would have likely seen Caesarion's heirs as both a model to emulate and a dangerous precedent. On one hand, his descendants could have been seen as rightful rulers, bringing stability and continuity to the empire. On the other hand, any ruler who followed Caesarion might have struggled with the legacy of a mixed heritage, caught between the expectations of Roman and Egyptian traditions, both of which had their own distinct visions of power. Would later Caesars have been able to secure their rule as firmly as their predecessor, or would they have been constantly challenged by factions that saw Caesarion's dynasty as a foreign influence, too heavily tied to Egypt? The long-term impact of Caesarion's dynasty would have been felt across generations. Rome, with its deepening ties to Egypt, might have evolved into a more cosmopolitan empire, with stronger cultural and trade relationships with the East. It could have seen a shift in its military structure, perhaps incorporating Egyptian methods of warfare alongside Roman discipline. In terms of governance, the empire might have moved further away from its republican roots, making way for a more centralized dynastic rule that mirrored the kingdoms of the East. The question remains, though, would such a dynasty have brought Rome lasting peace, or would the tensions between its Roman and Egyptian legacies have eventually torn the empire apart? The fate of Caesarion's dynasty would have ultimately shaped the future of the empire in ways that are impossible to predict fully. So what do you think would have happened if Caesarion became Caesar's true heir? Would Rome have prospered under his rule, with a new blend of Roman might and Egyptian diplomacy? Or would the empire have faced a new set of challenges, torn between two powerful legacies? Could Caesarion's reign have ushered in an era of peace and prosperity? Or would the tensions between Rome and Egypt have ultimately torn the empire apart? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm eager to hear what you think. Would you have liked to see Caesarion as the ruler of Rome? Or do you believe Octavian was the right choice to shape the future of the Roman Empire? And don't forget to subscribe for more alternate history discussions like this one. We've only scratched the surface of what could have been, and I've got plenty more what-if scenarios lined up. Be sure to share this video and I'll see you in the next one.